Hello, and thank you for joining this brand new episode of Speaking of Happy with your host, Eli Rigatuso. Joining me tonight
and not joining me tonight is Alex Rosario. We're going to just remove that off the screen. This is a special episode of Speaking of Happy this evening. I got my days confused and I thought it was actually Monday yesterday and not Tuesday, or maybe I thought it was Wednesday. I don't know. It's Wednesday today. But I got my days a little backwards. And the reason why I didn't want to miss the episode this week and actually get on here and have a conversation with y'all is because I did watch the Lincoln City Council meeting on Monday. And for those of you who don't know, they're back in, I believe it was January, February of this year, they actually passed an ordinance that added protections, LGBTQ plus protections to non-discrimination in Lincoln, which was pretty historic and pretty awesome and pretty amazing. And then immediately a group of folks, well-financed from money from outside the state, which happens quite frequently. This happens a lot, especially when it comes to our LGBTQ plus community advocating for protections and not special rights, nothing special, but actually protections from being fired for just being who we are, because we work in an at-will state and there are no protections. If somebody doesn't like me because I'm trans, they could say goodbye for any reason and I would have no recourse. Anyway, we do have protections here in Omaha. We've had protections here in Omaha for quite some time. I believe it's going on 10 years now. So a long time. And Lincoln was following suit and making some changes and doing the thing. And so that's what they did on Mondays, or back in earlier this year, is, pass those protections, which is wonderful. And then that group of folks with lots of funding from outside the state went and rounded up enough signatures to try to push it to a ballot initiative. And a lot of people don't understand what happened on Monday. And so I have a couple of guests who are going to be joining me here in after a little bit, not right away, but they're going to be joining me to have a conversation with me about what transpired. But in the meantime, what I'd like to do, I'm trying to export a portion of the video. I may just have to pull up the whole video and then scan to the part that I want to show you. There was some pretty remarkable things, though, that happened in conversation yesterday. And so I really wanted to share what some of the council folks shared in their statements, because they got to make a statement before they actually voted on whether or not to rescind. And there was some really incredible things that were shared. And so I do want to share with you all some of these statements because they're important. I mean, it's important to understand. And we're going to scan through because I know exactly where it starts. But it's important to listen to what was shared at the meeting in regard to this, what happened, and then how they voted and why they voted that way. And I just was really moved by what some of the city council people shared about what had happened and what was going on. So I just wanted to I wanted to fast forward to the right spot here. And I think it starts somewhere. Yep. So it's 8A 22-106, amending Title 11 of the Lincoln Municipal Code on Equal Opportunity is basically what they're talking about here. They asked the city attorney to come up to share some things. I don't understand everything that he said, but I'm going to go ahead and let that play. And then I'm going to kind of stop every now and again and kind of make some comment share some commentary. If you do have questions about what it is I'm talking about, please feel free to put them in the chat. I will be watching for comments and will share your comments as well. But this is really important. It's sad that it ended up the way that it did. But I think once you get some context around why it went the way that it did, it'll help make sense for you. So I'm going to just go ahead and play this.
Included section 7. We're now in section 8. Reconsideration due to sufficient petition signatures.
I just want to, before our clerk reads item 8A, just remind those listening and our council that we're not in a public hearing for these two items, 8A and 8B. We're in a voting session only. Is that correct?
So they
Mr.
already
City
took
Attorney?
public hearing.
Maybe I
That's
should
what
have
he's
you
trying to
brief
get
the
clear
audience and the
with the
council,
attorney
and I
here.
will also
But
remind
they
my
already
colleagues who are in
did
a
a vote on
position,
this.
to make comments, a comment on our votes, but not to debate one another. And other than that, please, go ahead.
If I may, I just thought I would say something briefly. This is not something that happens all the time. And I just want to advise everyone that this language, reconsideration due to sufficient petition signatures, is actually language from a previous council referendum that occurred in 2004. So we do have some precedent for you to follow, if you will. But again, the language is from that previous council agenda. It was essentially in the same place, meaning after the public hearing was concluded. The language that says council must repeal this ordinance in its entirety or place on the ballot for vote of the citizens of Lincoln. Council must also select a date for a special election or a general city election. That is also language that is from the previous 2004 council hearing and council agenda. That is also language from the charter. It is not meant as necessarily a direction to the council. It is language from the charter, and it is language that was used before when the city council was in this exact position before with a referendum.
So I would also just like to make a note that it's interesting that he's talking about 2004 and that we were at this place before in 2004, and here it is 2022 and we're back here again. But bear with me because there's just some really great testimony shared in this from this meeting, and I just want more people to be aware of it. So I'm going to keep playing.
Council, with respect to that, be happy to, as always, answer any questions.
Any other questions for our city attorney before we have the clerk read in item 8A at all? Mr. Shob.
I do have, thank you, Ms. Chair. I do have, so we haven't read the articles in. Does that make a difference on when we asked you questions about this? I have, say I wish to support one and not support another. And the language suggests if I don't support one, then I have to select a date. Is now the time to ask that question, or should we wait till after the thing is read into the, that's my first question.
I think I think it probably makes sense how we usually handle these, is that it'll be read into the record and then discussion
have
on it,
discussion.
and then I can.
Does that help?
It was very
Councilman
helpful,
Shob?
thank
Okay,
you.
good. Any other
Stay up here.
questions? That'd be a great thing if you don't mind.
Sure.
Okay, don't go too far away. Okay, very good. Okay, well, given that,
Read
all
the
right,
motion.
sure. Okay. Madam Clerk, would you please read item 8A and proceed?
Amending Title 11 of the Lincoln Municipal Code, Equity Opportunity, in Chapter 2.76 of the Lincoln Municipal Code, the city's personnel rules and regulations to prohibit discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. Council must repeal this ordinance 19711 passed on May 14th, 2012 in its entirety, or place on the ballot for vote of the citizens of Lincoln. Council must also select a date for a special election or general city election.
So may I just remind, as our city attorney just reminded all of us, this is item 8A. This was passed and voted on by a council that none of us served on
So this was back in
in
2012.
2012.
Yep.
So that is what we're voting on. And
So
yes.
moved.
Okay. And Mr. McGinnis, did you want to?
Yes, I will move
To
the
open.
motion.
Okay.
Second.
Okay,
So it's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion?
yes.
Councilman McGinnis.
Just real quickly, what this is only a reconsideration of that last, of the ordinance that was passed in May of 2010 that has not been acted on at this point. And so all we're doing is asking, because there was a significant petitions, and it was deemed by the Lancaster County Commissioner at that time that there were signatures were all accepted, or enough signatures were accepted to put this referendum back to the city council, and we have the choice of either rescinding or putting it up to a vote of the people. So I am asking for this to be a rescission of that ordinance passed in 2010.
Is there any discussion? Any comments?
2012.
2000.
He's got the wrong date there, but here, which can also add to the confusion of everything that's happening, is when they can't get the dates right. I do have my guest here. I'm going to bring my guest on. This is Natalie Weiss. Do you pronounce it Weiss or Weiss? It is Weiss. Okay, I was right. Got the thumbs up from the backstage. Natalie actually is sitting in the audience. Whenever they cut to the city council person that's standing there talking, you can see Natalie sitting back there. And the reason why I wanted Natalie to come on the show today, and I'll just go ahead and add Natalie to the stream. Hi, Natalie. Thank you so much for hopping on here last minute. Literally just asked you to join me about 20 minutes ago, but I was just determined to do this tonight because I want people to hear, and I know that not enough folks were tuned in. You know, it's like, so this is going back to 2012 was when the ordinance passed. It was May 14th, 2012. But they wanted to add some additional language, right? So there was a vote then in February of this year, or was it last year?
It was February of this year, and it's actually two different things. The one from 2012 is just a straight fairness ordinance. It only deals with LGBT stuff, and then the one that we're dealing with that we just recently dealt with the other day was a separate thing. It was a update to Title 11 of the Lincoln City Code, which is the section of the city code that deals with discrimination on a whole host of different classes. And these revisions was about 67 pages, I think, bringing city code discrimination language up to date with what federal law is, and included gender expression and sexual identity protections as well. So two different things. The one from there, it's yeah.
Yeah, but they have to, and the reason why it seems kind of confusing is they have to deal with each separately, right? So basically what they're doing, first of all, is they're voting to rescind what was passed back in 2012, correct? Because they have to do that first.
Right.
So that's basically what's happening here. I'm doing this because I want folks who are watching to kind of get up to speed as to how we got to where we did on Monday.
Yeah, and actually, just some more clarification. The reason that we decided to go ahead and rescind the 2012 ordinance also was because there was some concern that if we didn't rescind both of them, the NFA might have been able to sue the city to actually put it onto the ballot if we didn't clear the books of both of those referendums at the same time. And we didn't want to deal with that possibility. So
yeah, and it's so important because people think, well, let it go to a vote. And it's like, no, because if you let it go to a vote, we're letting it go to a vote led by a bunch of money from outside sources, more money than those of us who are here in the state can actually combat when it comes to running advertising and getting people, like basically running a campaign so that people will know how to vote. And anytime something's put to a vote like that, it's always written in very confusing language. It's always really difficult to get people to understand. I mean, and I know this because back in 2000, I was a part of the vote no on DOMA, which was which basically changed our state constitution. And it still says this to this day, because according to our rules in government, we'd actually have to vote to remove the language that says marriage is between one man and one woman. And so that's a whole nother can of worms. That's a whole nother topic. But it's like anytime you do something like physically change the Constitution in that manner, it has to go through the same process to actually remove it. And so that's kind of what's happening here, is that there was something passed in May 14th, says right there, May 14th, 2012. And then there was another thing passed in February of 2022, which were very historic and a long time coming and very much needed to add protections to our vulnerable communities, right? LGBTQIA2S plus folks living within Lincoln, because right now we have that within Omaha. They're trying to update language so that we have that within Lincoln. We lost Natalie for a second, but she's popping back. It'll take just a second. There we go. She's back. It's okay. You popped out and then you popped back in again. And so now, in order to prevent this, because if they didn't vote to rescind these things, that could potentially push things to a vote, right?
Yeah.
And like you just said about the potential of a lawsuit by this organization that's claiming to be for all families, which it is not, right? We know this, but some of the people watching may not know this. So anyway, I'm going to play a little bit more of this, and then we'll have more conversation. If you want me to stop, if you have a comment you want to make, just lift your hand up, hold your finger up, or lift up your hand, and I'll stop it, and you can say what you need to say. Okay.
Sure.
So you can provide some more context as we're kind of going through it. Okay.
12, May 4th,
So-
May 14th. Yes.
So I think that they're
That's
going to,
right.
they're going to vote on rescinding this first.
Any comments?
Yeah, it's the 2012 one first.
Councilman Shob?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Mr. Christie, thank you for remaining. So as read into the record, if the council decided not to rescind this, would we be required to pick a date today to put this on the ballot?
So I'm gonna give an answer. I'm gonna do the best that I can, and I will lead with, this in some ways is unprecedented. I can tell you that in 2004, there was referendum, the council, did not repeal it, and they did select, at that time, they selected a date in the future. It was around the same time, I think August, and they selected it for it to go on the ballot in November. Then, if you recall, the process is that then there must also be a resolution outlining
The language of
the language and directing the clerk and directing that there be an executive order issued within a certain period of time.
Yeah. All
That
of this
resolution came later.
government stuff
Okay,
can
so
be,
in the
can get a little
past,
confusing,
They did
but
not repeal it. so
Yeah,
we were
the
gonna put this
attorney,
on-
the attorney is just explaining to the city councilors right now the process of dealing with this 2012 issue. None of
Yeah.
the people who are on the council right now were there in 2012, and so they just had some procedural questions for him.
but also just procedural. And like he's stating, he's like, this is unprecedented. This doesn't happen very often, is what he said even earlier in some of the stuff that I played earlier. So I think that's really important to note, that it seems like these issues, when they do come up, especially around our community, there's just unprecedented things happening. Because we've got this whole contingent of people that are pushing against it, because of the fear mongering and all the other bullshit that happens out in the world. So anyway, we'll let the city attorney continue.
election later in the future, and then they came back with a resolution that was more specific, okay? I will also just, I don't know that this has to be said, but this is from 10 years ago, and nothing happened for 10 years.
Few months.
Yeah, it's been a while, right? And so the language in the charter suggested that action would need to be taken to either repeal or place it on the ballot, and we're not doing that until today, 10 years later. I think that the precedent, I think I've kind of spelled it out for you, right?
Yes, thank you. I
If
appreciate
that,
it. That was helpful.
I hope I'm making sense. I mean, we haven't been in a situation where the council did not repeal it and did not put it to a vote, that we have not encountered that.
Councilwoman Raybold.
I do have some comments, and I can address both of the ordinances at the same time. And I think that's what you were asking all of us, just to comment once.
This is the part that, like, these comments by these council folks were pretty powerful and unexpected in some cases. So I will just share that some of the statements that are being made could cause you to get emotional. They got me emotional. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to share them, because I'm so proud of some of the city council members that are serving in Lincoln right now, because this was a difficult thing that they had to do.
I'm asking my colleagues to vote no on rescinding both the ordinances, because in effect, it negates the efforts of so many for so many years to end discrimination for our LGBTQIA plus community, veterans, and people with disabilities. The process of enacting these ordinances reflects the efforts of so many in our community. The 2022 ordinance has been a lengthy and inclusive one of more than 2.5 years. Councilwoman Washington and others work with city law, city council members, informing and including stakeholders, as well as trans members and others from the LGBTQ community, listening and learning from other communities and developing a coalition and strategy to end this discrimination once and for all and bring real justice to a city like so many cities across the United States have done, including Omaha, now more than 10 years ago. In Omaha, there have been no incidents and no reported cases of sexual predators, with no additional construction costs or modifications, as our opponents allege. We moved forward with this after discussions, and we had consensus with our colleagues and our mayor. It's thanks to the ACLU and Out Nebraska, we were able to
you
connect
want to
with the
say something,
ACL.
I saw you raise your hand.
Yeah, well, why don't you go ahead and let Jane finish, and then, yeah.
Okay.
Use in Anchorage, Alaska, and Boston, Massachusetts, to understand better what hardships and horrific lies our trans community would be subjected to, like those communities faced in Alaska and Massachusetts when they brought similar referendums and ordinances before their community. Several of my city council colleagues participated in those Zoom meetings. We followed their recommended steps and guidance that they used in their cities by preparing, by organizing, by hiring a campaign manager, fundraising, polling, and bringing deep canvassing efforts to Lincoln. All the while, including and listening to trans members in each of these steps. The tragic loss of Milo devastated everyone in these efforts, and we paused to allow everyone and so many to mourn his passing. I am deeply saddened that we have come to this point in time after tremendous outreach, coalition building, support from our community, and polling proof that the majority of Lincolnites favor equity and non-discrimination. To cave into the fearmongers and naysayers is demoralizing. To protect and celebrate our diversity is our duty as elected officials. To protect the vulnerable in our community that are marginalized for being different for who they are and who they love is our job. Robert F. Kennedy said, "Few will have the greatness to bend history itself, but each of us can work to change a small portion of events, and in that total of all those acts will be written the history of our generation. Each time a person stands up for an ideal or acts to improve the lots of others or strikes out against injustice, it sends forth a tiny ripple of hope, and crossing each other from a million centers of energy and daring, those ripples build a current that can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance." I respectfully ask and plead with my colleagues to vote no to rescind the ordinances. Voting to rescind is a tremendous and another devastating loss and setback for so many in our community who have suffered, who have hoped, and who have waited so patiently. Keeping these ordinances in place are that ripple of hope that strikes out against injustices that have no place in our hearts, in our laws, in our city, or in our state. The fight for equality has been long, and we will remain on the right side of history, fighting for people in marginalized communities who deserve fair treatment in all aspects of life. We remain committed to ensuring our city is inclusive and welcoming. It is Lincoln for all.
So what were you going to say about her comments earlier? And
Yeah, so there's so much here, Eli. This city of Lincoln has been dealing with this issue for a really long time. And
yeah,
Councilwoman Rabel had some really soaring language there, especially at the end of her remarks about the importance of fighting for these things. But she bald-faced lied in significant portions of her statement just there. So I directed a canvas on this issue that was funded by ACLU in the city of Lincoln at the end of 2017. We went and spoke to Lincoln voters specifically about their feelings on trans bathroom access and how they would feel about potentially voting on that. We spoke with a good cross section of the city. We were sure to accurately include the voter makeup of the city at that point, and we were trying our best to accurately represent the racial makeup of the city during that effort. And the data that we got back from that effort at the end of 2017 wasn't particularly encouraging. We were, in our best estimate at that time, about 5 points behind on the issue. And we knew Houston had just tried to pass something similar, I think in 2015 or 16, not long before we had done that. They had a majority Democratic city council at the time, and they had an out lesbian gay member, a gay mayor at the time. They were pretty almost identical situation to what Lincoln is dealing with right now. And they felt that they were in a position, because they had that Democratic majority and they had an out lesbian mayor, that they were ready to vote on this. Houston ran a rock star campaign in that effort. They crossed every T, they dotted every I, and they lost. And we knew in 2017 that if we were going to try and put this up to a vote, it was going to be very expensive to attempt, and that the outcome was going to be very uncertain. Even with our, we've got 3 out gay members on our city council right now. Our mayor, Larian Gaylor Baird, ran on LGBT equality. It was a central plank of her campaign, and she won pretty convincingly. and it was um, difficult to explain to the city leaders that just because voters are willing to vote for someone who says that they support LGBT equality does not mean that those same voters are ready to go vote for trans inclusion in society.
Yeah.
It's not the same thing, and a lot of voters view those two issues in very different lights.
I mean,
Um,
a lot of people in general see those, that's why you hear folks even in our community saying LGB, and
Yeah.
leaving off the rest of those letters, because
Yeah.
there is that transphobia. There is that, like, you just make our community look bad. There is this whole, like, that's the people that say things like, well, we're just going to have the whole alphabet one day. And that doesn't make
Yep.
any sense. And it's
Yep.
just like, it's because they're trying to push away what they deem as not worthy of the support,
Yeah.
because they don't understand it themselves,
Mhm.
right?
That
So
is correct.
there's like a double-edged sword thing happening here. This is why there's been so many things that have been pushed in legislation, nationally and state by state. Because if you are, you act right as a gay person, and you're not as, like a very cisgendered white gay man could push legislation through to support the community, as long as they left off some of the things
Yeah.
about the community.
Or as long as there's not a public vote on the issue. Like Omaha was able to get this done in large part because Omaha does not have the Lincoln City charter has a clause that any decision that the city council makes, literally any of them, can be put up to referendum. The citizens of this city can gather signatures on any decision that the city council makes, and if they gather enough signatures, they can force a vote on that issue. And so
Mm.
that's the problem that we deal with here in Lincoln. This isn't just a city council action. If it was, there would, that the great, we would have had it done a decade ago. But
Right.
because our city government is set up to allow citizens to force a vote on literally anything that the city council does, we have to be cognizant of that when we try to push forward on this. And so, like I was said, that happened in 2017, the ACLU, our little canvas. We had some brief discussions right at the beginning of 2018 with some city council members and the city attorney at that time. And we just explained to them that the situation was not right to be doing this right now. We didn't have the money to be going up against the NFA. The outcome was extremely uncertain. And we were trying to explain to them that, attempting this effort without the money and the campaign organization meant that you were going to be putting trans Lincolnites, especially, but all of the LGBT umbrella in Lincoln, but especially trans people, through a whole lot of stress to have this civic vote, to have this civic discussion, and you would be doing it without all of the tools that we think would be necessary to have a good shot at winning. So we were able to put a little pause on it at that time. And then in the middle of 2019, Sandra Washington had just recently been appointed by the mayor. She's a new city council person for Lincoln at that time. And she was really wanting to do something. And these conversations started up again with myself, with ACLU Nebraska, with Out Nebraska, with some other LGBT political advocates in the city who have really deep understanding on this issue and what it would take to win at the ballot. We had discussions through the summer of 2019. They were very emotional. And again, we were explaining to the city council, we can't do this right now. We have to have the money. We have to have the organization first. It took a lot of cajoling, but we were finally able to get a consensus among the city council that introduction at that time was also not right. And then in 2020, in some of our previous discussions in the years prior, we had discussed that Lincoln City municipal elections, high water turnout is around 50,000 people. That happens in presidential years. And we were explaining that we wanted to have as high a turnout as possible when we had this vote, and that the ideal time to be introducing would be during a presidential year. So in spring 2020, these discussions sort of kicked up again, and we again had to explain to the city council, to Sandra Washington, to Jane Raybould, to Tammy Ward, to James Michael Bowers, and Tom Beckius, that we had to have the money raised before the introduction of the issue, because NFA, the Nebraska Family Alliance, was going to be ready to go day one. They've already got the money. They've already got the campaign infrastructure that they need to go mount a successful campaign. So we had to have all of our ducks in a row before we introduced, because NFA was going to come hard immediately, and we were going to need to match that energy from them in order for us to head off their worst messaging and to make sure that we were getting in front of voters at the same time that they were, right? And it was explained that because it was the middle of COVID, that fundraising was going to be extremely difficult in 2020. And we didn't feel like it, we couldn't do a deep canvas in 2020. We couldn't go door knocking, in the middle of COVID. We can't go face to face with voters and talk about this issue in 2020. And we made them pause it again. And then in the fall of 2020, we were able to pull in the state of Massachusetts and Anchorage, Alaska, who had both voted on this issue, which is what Jane was describing in some of her remarks. The consensus at the table in those discussions was that it would be very irresponsible for us to move forward on this without funding and without a campaign apparatus in place before introduction. Both Anchorage and Massachusetts explained to us that they would have had absolutely no chance at all without every dollar that they had raised and every campaign operative that they had hired for those efforts. And they were significant efforts. Anchorage, Alaska is a little bit smaller than Lincoln, I think 10 or 20,000 people smaller than Lincoln. And they spent, if my memory serves me correctly, about $300,000 to do that municipal election and to be successful with it. And Massachusetts did it as a state. They spent well over $1 million. It was a lot of money. Massachusetts, of course, a very liberal state, home of Elizabeth Warren, and they had to spend $1 million to go get this accomplished in Massachusetts. And the consensus at the table at that time was, don't do this unless you've got the money and unless you have the campaign infrastructure. And we went into a whole bunch of detail about exactly what the NFA would say, what the opposition language would be, how they would try to frame the issue, and how damaging that would be, especially for trans women. And that, if we didn't have this money and infrastructure in place, we were just going to surrender the initiative to our opponents and make our chances of success even more difficult if we weren't ready to go. And that was the consensus of the table. So when Jane is saying that she did everything that ACLU asked of them, and she did everything that Massachusetts and Anchorage had suggested, that is completely untrue. And it's also untrue that she followed the advice of trans Lincolnites, because we were all saying at that table that now was not the time, and that the only time that we could do this was once the money had been raised. We were trying to tell the city council, if you want to do this, you've got to go raise the money first. And they decided not to do that. And that was there's so much. I'm sorry to ramble, but
no. I think it's important to get this information out, because I know that there are people who are probably out there kind of confused as to why it happened, why did it go down this way, and how could these city council members do this, vote to rescind, and without having the context around that, I think that it can cause, sadness and frustration within the community. And especially because, not a whole lot of folks are able to go and sit and be in those city council meetings because they take for freaking ever. And there's all kinds of other things that they're doing and they're covering. And then you just don't know if you're going to be able to even make a statement. If you are able to make a statement, you can only talk for so long. I mean, there's just all of these different things that need to be understood. And I don't know if enough people know that to be able to understand that. I do have another guest joining us. It is Michelle Skywalker. Michelle, thank you so much for joining us today. I do see that you're on mute, though. I'm going to unmute you. Oh, you got yourself.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you. Tell our viewers a little bit about what how you fit into this this situation and what's happening right now with what has transpired.
Well, after our party got a new leadership, I was asked to appointed to be on chair of the issue committee, and
Okay.
then I was asked to take on this issue.
Okay.
So my job was to get as much as Democrats would vote yes on this resolution to get it passed, and then also to take the resolution to action, which was City Council, to put pressure on them because the majority of them are Democratic leaders. And so, as the Lancaster County Democratic Party as a whole, we voted on this, and it wasn't an easy vote. It wasn't. It was very hard. A lot of people I talked to, because like right when we agreed to pass this resolution, word got out fast about this resolution coming up. And it was a lot of negative feedbacks, and it wasn't going to go our way. It barely passed.
And so this was back in February, though, you're talking, right?
Back in March or April.
Okay.
So I went and called all these Democrats on our who are voters in the party, because you have to show up to so many meetings, central committee meetings, to become a eligible voter within the party. So I had to call them up and, basically asked them to vote yes, and a lot of them said no, or they don't understand. And I said, well, that's why I need you. You're a voting member. I need you to come to this meeting and listen to both sides. And it was a very hot issue and debate. It took almost 2 hours long, but it educated a lot of people that were sitting on the fence about it.
Right.
And it was surprising that there was a lot of straight white men that were like, you're right. We should, like, I didn't know about this, but this is something that we need to take on and do the right thing.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And, that's another thing that I think is really important to understand about this is some of the other comments that were made by some of the city council members that I think are really impactful and important. And again, they were, they had to vote in ways that they didn't necessarily want to.
Mhm.
And so I think it's just really important to, let's see here. Why will it not let me pull that back up into the studio? There we go. All right. So I'm going to pull that back up, and I'm going to do this so that we can still be seen over here on the side. I'm just going to keep playing the rest of this, because this is kind of the rest of what transpired in the meeting. So Jane just made her comments, and Natalie was kind of clarifying some of the misinformation that Jane was just giving about the process and how we got to this point. So now we're going to continue on with this.
Any other comments on items 8A? Councilwoman Raybold addressed both. You're welcome to do that, or on each item. Any other comments on 8A?
We'll get a chance to speak on.
Of course you
8A.
will.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Okay. Well, Councilman, I'm going to comment on 8A, but I want.
8A. yeah,
Okay.
I'm
Okay.
fine.
I am. I just want to say that I won't be voting to rescind 8A because my philosophy over the years has been to clean up old legislation, just have it off the books, and it has very much less to do with what Councilwoman Raybold eloquently and passionately described. But I think 10 years is long enough to carry it, and so for that reason, I'll be voting to rescind 8A, and I wanted to make that explanation. So are there any other comments before Councilman?
I do have to have one lighthearted comment here. I wish they would get a little bit more mic awareness.
Yeah, I was hearing that from a bunch of people watching too.
I
Yeah.
mean, like when they're popping their peas, they need to get windscreens on their microphones. Like when she turns her head, see, when I turn my head away from the microphone like that, it's harder for you to hear me, right? Is that a great example? So it's just for somebody who does this for a living, I just needed to make that comment.
McGinnis, do you want to close on that item, or are you good? Or?
Do you want to speak?
Just very quickly.
I'll let-
I'm gonna
Washington.
reserve most of my comments for the next item, but I cannot vote to rescind this item. I had said to my colleagues in the years leading up to this conversation today that I would only rescind this one once we had successfully passed a title expanding non-discrimination protections to everyone. And that has not happened, and I cannot vote to rescind.
Any other Okay. All right. Let's move on.
Call the
Motion.
vote on the motion.
I can call the vote on the motion. Okay. Raybold,
No.
Washington,
No.
Schob,
Yes.
Beckius,
Yes.
McGinnis,
Yes.
Bowers,
Yes.
Ward.
Yes.
Read 8B.
Motion carried 4-2.
5-2.
Me, 5-2. Thank you.
All right, let's move on, please, to item 5.
Make sure that's in the public
8B.
record.
Excuse me.
Item 8B is amending various provisions of Title 11 of the Lincoln Municipal Code, Equal Opportunity. Council must repeal this ordinance 21-21220, passed on February 14th, 2022 in its entirety, or placed on the ballot for vote of the citizens of Lincoln. Council must also select a date for a special election or general city election.
So moved.
So they have to select a date if they vote to not rescind, correct? Because then it has to go to a public, then it has to go to a vote. It has to
Yeah,
go on the ballot.
yeah, the city attorney was actually explaining in the
Yeah.
earlier section that
Yep.
they wouldn't actually have to choose a date today. If they could make a motion to hold the vote, and then they could come back in a couple of weeks and actually set the date. But yeah, if they would have a small window of time to set the date if they decided to hold a vote. So
Yep. And I just only wanted to say that in case somebody had joined late and kind of was wondering where we're at too. So, so this is the second part of this issues 8A and 8B. They went ahead and rescinded. The vote passed to rescind 8A, and now we're having comments only from the city council people. There's no public testimony or comment happening here, but I'm going to let this continue.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded by Councilman Bowers. Is there discussion on item 8B? Comments? Councilman Schob.
Now would be a time for me to
You bet,
speak on,
of
yes.
course.
This is long. I tried to still it down a little bit, but it's going to take a while. So get comfortable. This is going to take a minute. As most of you know, I grew up in Kentucky. Both my parents went to segregated schools. That was the way of life in Kentucky. I was a second-class citizen. My parents were second-class citizens. The Supreme Court in the Plessy versus Ferguson case and long enshrined Jim Crow laws in the South solidified my parents' second-class status in the country, where the Declaration of Independence stated that all men are created equal. The Supreme Court, in the case of Brown versus the Board of Education, legally ended school segregation, and the Civil Rights Act of 1964 addressed other issues of de jure segregation. My parents' civil rights were guaranteed under the law, thanks to the courts and legislation. However, if the civil rights of my parents had been put to a vote of the people in the South in the 60s, I am confident they would have been denied. When the votes of minority groups are put to the ballot and the majority groups get to vote on it, I am not confident that minority rights will be extended. I attended integrated schools. I learned to respect the rule of law. I watched how the law protected people and improved the lives of many. I also saw how the law was used to punish and disadvantage others. I was taught that there were legal methods to redress issues of injustice in our society when that happened. I continue to believe that's true. I also continue to believe that allowing one group to vote on the civil rights of another group is wrong. In June of 2020, I was happy to see the Supreme Court affirm the civil rights of the LGBTQ community through the Bostock and Clayton Court rule versus Clayton County Court ruling. This ruling provided legal standing for individuals to file a complaint when they believe they have been discriminated against. It provided legal standing. In February of 2020, this body changed our municipal code to reflect the changes outlined in that Supreme Court decision. Following the rule of law, as laid out by the U.S. Supreme Court. Some members of our community disagreed with that decision and used the rights granted to them by the city's charter to challenge that code change. After gathering the required number of signatures, the enactment of that code was suspended. The rule of law now requires us as a council to, option 1, place that issue on a ballot for a vote of the people, a vote to grant or deny civil rights to members of our society, or option 2, rescind the ordinance as written. Between these two horrible choices, these are both extremely distasteful choices, I am going to choose to rescind. I was surprised to see so much opposition to a Supreme Court ruling. The Supreme Court is there to arbitrate our laws, and why so many people would disagree with it puzzles me to this day. I take responsibility for not working hard enough to explain this to my fellow Nebraskans. Today's action is effectively a reset back to February 22, a do-over, which will give me time to talk to the community, to explain the legal rights that the federal government grants the LBGT community residents of this city, this community, this state, and this country. Those rights have been granted. I will continue my commitment to protecting the rights of all ethnic minorities, all minority members in our community. That is important to me. That work starts today.
Man, his comments, just like, ooh, so we have somebody commenting here. It says, what are we watching? And I said, this is the Lincoln City Council meeting from this past Monday. What was it about? I think I was under a rock. Nikki, you are never under a rock. Lincoln City Council, there's two different things that they had to vote on this past Monday. Both were having to do with non-discrimination ordinances that had been passed. But then things, one was back in 2012, and they needed to either vote to rescind it or vote to allow it to go forward. But then that would have forced it to have to go to a ballot initiative. Then back in March, April of this year, they actually voted to add to their non-discrimination policies or non-discrimination ordinances to provide protections for sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. And then a group from the Nebraska Family Alliance, is it, Natalie? Is that the name of the group? So the NFA, which is, I could think of lots of other F words to go fit in that. But they went and gathered enough signatures to force this to go to ballot unless they rescind it. And so basically what we're watching is some of the public statement that was made by the council members. No public could actually make statements at this point. It was just the city council members could share how they felt about what they're having to do here, basically. So they already voted to rescind what was passed back in 2012. Now they're sharing their comments about why or how they're voting about this, what was passed earlier this year. I think that helps you. That should help. Natalie, am I missing anything? Natalie or Michelle, is there anything else that you would like to add?
No, you hit it right on the head.
Yeah. So that's basically what we're watching, Nikki. I appreciate you tuning in. Nikki is one of our biggest fans. I'm going to have to do something special for Nikki, but Nikki tunes in a lot. Doesn't always tune in on time, but she tunes in, and I do appreciate that. But anyway, so I just really it just really, when I was watching this on Monday, listening to his statements and the fact that he just cut right to the quick, putting anybody's civil rights up to a vote when you're allowing the majority to have the say just doesn't feel right. And I just agree with that statement 110%, 120%. So I just like what a wonderful human to be serving in the position that he's serving it, because he's serving the people, right? And that means all of the people. Oh, the notification just came to your phone. Okay. So my notification that we were live, well, that came a little late.
How did it come late? Where was your service, Nikki?
Yeah. That's a service issue. It's got to be. All right. So we're going to keep going here. I think James Michael Bowers is up next, and grab a tissue. Grab a tissue. That's all I got to say there.
Thank you. Who else would like to comment at this time on item 8B? Councilman Bowers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The LGBTQ community will continue to fight for equal protections for all residents of Lincoln. We will do this in a way that pushes forward equality while shielding our community from ongoing attacks on our freedom. We've seen what happens when we erase LGBTQ plus children from protections for their young lives to grow. Let's not make that mistake again. Let's not make the mistake of erasing children from the protection they trust us to provide them. The majority of attacks on Title XI, or the Fairness Ordinance, are based on lies and scare tactics against our transgender and non-binary community members. We must put transgender and non-binary voices at the center of next steps for Title XI, because transgender and non-binary individuals will be targeted by those whose actions create lifelong harm to our LGBTQ plus neighbors by halting progress of achieving protections, recognition, and the ability to come out of the closet just so that they can live their lives. The council has heard from several transgender and non-binary community leaders about how to proceed. And after conversations and some devastating losses in our community, the message has become clear to me, and that's we must rescind this ordinance, continue to strengthen our relationship with honest conversations, support, and acceptance, and move forward as a united community for all LGBTQ plus students, parents, peers, and for our allies. We will achieve a day when the LGBTQ plus community receives full and equal protections, where we can have the same opportunity as every other Nebraskan to work, live, and raise our families. That will be the win. The win is not just putting it on a ballot, regardless if it'll win or lose. The win is not putting it to a vote, our rights to a majority vote. The win is not simply passing it by the council, where it'll sit in limbo for 10 years or become unenforceable. The win is where we successfully bring this into reality. Having a goal of anything short of that is about hitting a milestone and not about long-lasting change and protection for the LGBTQ plus community in the next generation. We will win this when we have the ability and resources to counteract the lies and scare tactics from those whose actions intentionally or unintentionally create lifelong harm. I remember growing up gay and being afraid to tell anyone, and being even more afraid that I was going to spend an eternity in hell because of how I was born. I used to pray to God to undo my birth, because not even being born seemed like the best outcome in comparison to what the messages and narrative was all around me about what my destiny was going to be. Pain, torture, and suffering without end. I received these messages by adults, leaders, and the community around me, not by my own relationship with God. I was lucky. I grew older. I was able to create a life of love, acceptance, and family. I made it. I barely made it, but I was one of the lucky ones. I made it, but there's many of us who do not, and there are many of us who still will not, that will struggle with the lies and scare tactics around them. There are many of us who will not make it. If we do not have the resources or ability to fight these lies and scare tactics, very similar to what we grew up with, then we add to the creation of lifelong harm, either intentionally or unintentionally. We won't be reckless. We will continue to push forward equality while shielding our community from ongoing attacks on freedom. We will tell the transgender, non-binary community that their voices matter.
Thanks everybody for joining.
The LGBT community, our city, and this council will not give up the fight towards full equality. This is just a next step till that one beautiful day when these protections become codified in law and when all LGBTQ plus adults and kids see this world as equally theirs.
Councilwoman, please.
That statement right there. I so appreciate his vulnerability and just how honest he was in sharing his own personal experience. I just think like that just really got me. I actually had to even post on Facebook and tag him for just sharing his truth.
Yeah. James is a really special elected leader that we have here in Lincoln. He's pretty awesome and pretty special. And it was really hard being in the room while he was saying those things. And I know that a lot of the pain that he was expressing there was pain over the necessity of having to rescind this at this time. The Lancaster County Democratic Party, myself, several other LGBT community activists who are politically involved and really understand this issue had been clear that rescind is what we needed to do in this moment, but that was not a fun argument to make. And I know it was exceptionally hard for James and Tom, especially, to make that vote. And
Yeah. Can totally feel that just reverberated, just very, very poignant. So we are Lincoln is very fortunate to have a number of the folks that are serving on this current council because they're just really so committed to just equity for all. That's so palpable to me. So
Would you like to share next?
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm voting to rescind the updates to Title 11 today, not because I don't believe in the good work and updates of them, but because I do not believe there is a path forward to victory at the ballot box at this time. I want to use my time today for a couple of brief comments. First, to thank the many citizens and organizations and community partners that agree that Title 11 should be updated. I appreciate their support and their good work and their willingness to stand alongside marginalized communities to make Lincoln great for all. Lincoln is strongest when everyone is encouraged to reach their full potential. I would also just like to take a moment to remind folks that protections will continue after today. The Supreme Court held laws that prohibit sex discrimination prohibit discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity as well, as long as laws do not contain indications to the contrary. The Lincoln Commission on Human Rights will continue to enforce prohibition of discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity in the areas of housing, employment, and public accommodations. The outcome of today's vote is that our municipal code will not be updated, not that our citizens will not be afforded protections as they are offered today. As Councilman Shob mentioned, the work to codify protections into Lincoln Municipal Code does not stop today. For Lincoln to continue to be a high quality and attractive city, the work must not stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilwoman Washington.
We lost Michelle. All right. That's all right.
The same thing that happened to me. Maybe she'll be right back.
Yeah. Any comments about what he just shared? No.
No, no. I mean, I know that was also extremely difficult for him to say. Everybody who voted in favor of this did so pretty reluctantly. Even Richard did this pretty reluctantly.
Wow. Okay, there you are.
Sorry about that.
No,
It happened Same thing happened to me just a little bit ago. So.
And Natalie popped off and popped back on too. So we're all good, but we're going to continue on here. We're going to forge forward.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Crafting remarks for today's session has not been easy, clouded as I've been by disappointment. But the task of speaking truth is always.
Yeah, she rolled her eyes.
Today, we have before us a motion to repeal Title 11 rather than let it go to referendum. Tonight, for different reasons and from different political ideologies, my colleagues and the constituents they represent would like to stall current efforts to change our municipal code and extend equal rights to everyone in Lincoln. I cannot cast a vote in that direction. I believe the moral foundation of our country's Constitution is in the Declaration of Independence and its principle of equal rights, and I believe the overwhelming majority of Lincolnites believe the same. And I also know that there are some who would put parameters on this basic precept, others who believe that there should be limits on who is included in the phrase, all are created equal. As my fellow councilman noted, the Supreme Court ruled in June 2020 that to fire someone simply for being homosexual or transgendered is discrimination on the basis of sex. And this is what fired up the initial opposition. Their moral outrage about gay, lesbian, and transgendered people and their desire to narrow who is included in the phrase, all are created equal. Lost in many of these conversations are the other critical and necessary updates to Title 11 that would have extended employment and housing protections to active duty military and veterans, the addition of hair texture and hairstyles within the definition of race that would have been protected in the workplace, and a greater alignment with the Americans with Disabilities Act that would have ensured a greater degree of safety for individuals with disabilities as they access housing and public accommodations. As maddeningly as the opposition from the religiously and politically conservative on the right has been, it is the opposition from the left which disappoints me. The struggle for civil rights has been a long journey. Each generation has had to grapple with moving us closer to that goal at all levels, local, state, and federal. And each generation has had to remain vigilant that once acquired, our rights are not allowed to be chipped away. Today, you with whom I share much commonality are asking that we step back and wait for a more perfect time, a more perfect circumstance. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in his letter from a Birmingham jail discussed the similar conundrum of those he would see as allies who wrote to him, I agree with you, Dr. King, in goal, but I cannot agree with your methods. And they advised him to delay action for a more convenient season. And this might be how it winds up tonight. But the journey toward the promise was never guaranteed to be easy or short or convenient. To the upcoming generations, to the youth of our city, I want you to know, I see you. I have been where you stand now, and I promise you, it will get better. I will continue to advocate for the full inclusion of all because I believe in the promise of the Constitution, its promise of equal rights and equal protection. Our work is not yet done, and I have not lost hope. Lincoln is a great community with a history of welcoming the immigrant and refugee, for celebrating diversity and our shared commitment to caring for neighbors. All of this gives me the strength to know that I will not be derailed. Our work is not yet done. I hope, though it is difficult, that neither you or I have lost our ability to hope.
Thank you, Councilwoman Moshi.
Also powerful statements. And, my reason for wanting to reshare this testimony happened, or these comments happened this past Monday, just 2 days ago. And the reason why I wanted to share this here on Speaking of Happy is because I wanted folks to actually be able to see some of these comments and understand that although this vote was incredibly difficult for these council members, they did it not without having some heartache. but it was the best way forward. And as Natalie explained earlier, and once the stream is over, you can actually go back and watch the entire thing if you've joined us yet, late, because it just really is important to understand that context. And I think sometimes we, people will jump to responses and think that this is a bad thing that this is happening, but it's actually the best way forward. And I know that that's difficult to understand. And so that's why I wanted to talk more about it and to share this and provide some additional context. So that's what we're doing. If you've joined late, I'm going to keep going though. We're going to keep playing. And again, Natalie or Michelle, if you do want to say something, if you just want to raise your hand and hold it up there, and then when I glance over and see that you have your hand up, I'll pause the video and we can talk a little bit more. So, but we're almost to the end of this portion of where they vote and how they vote and all that. So it's almost done.
Councilman McGinnis, before you close, would you mind if I read my statement?
No, go ahead.
Then we'll have you close, and I think everyone has had an opportunity at that point. This is a hard day for everyone, and I know that. I'm voting against this item to rescind, but I want you all to know some more reasons why. Defeatism is not a strategy. It's been used in this issue, around this issue, for a reason not to proceed with putting this on the ballot. Time and time again, we have heard we can't do this because we're not going to win. This defies all logic. I have strongly rejected this notion from day one. This underestimates our community and the voters of the city to do the right thing. I want to ask you all to think about the consequences of what if Martin Luther King or John F. Kennedy would have not taken their actions as leaders if they had been afraid of losing, or afraid of their people being hurt or damaged. What if Rosa Parks would have gotten off the bus? No one has been able to explain to me why the fear of losing has been a strategy when 65 miles down the road in Omaha, as somebody mentioned, I think Councilwoman Raybould, over 10 years ago, their city council was able to pass a fairness ordinance. With no defeatism getting in their way. No one has had this answered. No one has been able to tell me that. No tragedies have followed as an unforeseen outcome. None. Yet here we are. There is no perfect time to do this. This is not democracy. Here's another reason. Another constituent wrote to all of us this morning and said, this is 2022. It's not 1982. I have been and will always continue to be an ally to all of the gay community. I will be frustrated and I will be very sad today if this vote to rescind is passed. And I know many will continue to not be protected in our community as a result of that action today. Lincoln is better than this. But I, like others, are not going to give up the fight. And I just want to say, lastly, I see this as a call to action to this council and to me to be good leaders who are not divided amongst ourselves. We need to stay positive. We need to encourage respect for everyone, everywhere, and we need to stay hopeful, and we need to stay steadfast. We're not going away. The example of being civil and being kind begins with each one of us. So with that, Councilman McGinnis, would you like to close?
Just real quick, I didn't have a nice speech written out or anything. And as everybody knows, or what has been said in the past, is the reason I brought this forward was just because of the divisiveness I feel in the community on this issue. And so I don't believe now would be the good time to bring this forward. I really, really appreciate my other council members in what they've said. I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear a lot of what you have said. I like what Benny said. It's time we do a little better job of educating and get the word out, because I believe there is a Title 11 process that we can go through, that we can get to as a community as a whole. And that's what I would like to do if we rescind this. And I'll be one there to help work on it.
Thank you for that. So we have a motion And a second, which I believe was by Councilman Bowers. Okay, all right, very good. Madam Clerk, could you please call the motion on item 8B to rescind?
Raybold,
No.
Washington,
No.
Schob,
Yes.
Beckius,
Yes.
McGinnis,
Yes.
Bowers,
Yes.
Ward.
No.
Motion carried 4-3.
Okay. We can move on, Madam Clerk.
All right. I think that was the gist of it there. And Nikki made a good point. You can't educate those who do not wish to be educated. This is true. Our community certainly understands that. That there are folks who are going to just, they've planted their feet, in a place that is not at all open and affirming and accepting, and it's grounded in information that is outdated and archaic. But what I would love to hear from the two of you is, now that they've done what they needed to do and actually, was the smart way to go given what we're up against, how are we going to move forward with this particular thing? Because we know it needs to come back up. We know that there do need to be protections in place. But first of all, can each of you kind of share a little bit about where you're at and how you feel about what happened? And then kind of give us a little idea about where we go from here.
Yeah, Michelle, do you want to go first? Should I go first?
Yeah, I brought this up last night. Is that once we got this passed, I was like, we need to take action. Because it's been in limbo, and every time it comes back up, we have this right wing group coming up. So I said, we just can't sit there and say, yeah, we did this, and then not do nothing. I was like, so we was talking about it. We have to talk to our legal team in the Democratic Party. But I suggested we might have to do a nonpartisan group, because a lot of those funds that we can get from people, they donate to nonpartisan. I did this with Winona Duke up in Minnesota, because I was big on the movement of getting Trump out of office. So yay, because it was the native vote that pushed him out. And for the past 4 years, I've been working hard on that native vote. And I worked hard on the very first Native American presidential forum that we had, because we never had that before. Because, with all the history in the past, what the government has, the U.S. government done to the natives, we are mistrustful, right? But with all that was going on, we knew we had to step up. And so for the past 4 years, when I was chair of the Native Caucus for the Democratic Party, that was my thing, was to push and educate different natives from different regions, reservations, cities. Like, we have to vote. We have to step up in these politics, right? And so it wasn't an easy task, because when they had that presidential forum, they had to keep it nonpartisan because to get the funds to do that. But as chair of the Native Caucus, I was able to reach out to all the Democrats that are running. There was plenty of Democrats running, and it was like herding cats to get them to come. And like I said, the Four Winds direction, they told me thank you. And they said, you really need to be telling people about this, because they said if it wasn't for me, this would never got done, right? And I tell them, well, how it's supposed to be. I was like, I'm humble. You guys brag for me, But it was a lot of work. It was a lot of work. And so I take pride in that because there was a lot of Native Americans from all over, from different programs, agencies, different activists, water protectors that came to that, and they understood that. And so, like I said, we didn't get the president that we wanted, because majority of the natives wanted Bernie Sanders, but, it is what it is, kind of lesser of the two evils. So back to that, that's why I said, when I was Duke, I had to go do some work up there in Minnesota with that population. And you can see during the election vote, that population turned out heavily to vote. And so from my experiences, like, a lot of these things have to be nonpartisan to get the funding and stuff like that. So as issue committee, we want to do more, but we got to look at the legality of how can we move forward.
Okay. Natalie, what do you have to say?
So much. I don't even know really where to begin. So I guess I'll just kind of go, Eli, and if you need to interject or you need to stop me or whatever, go ahead and do that. So first of all, both councilpersons, Washington and Ward, in their comments invoked Martin Luther King, invoked Gandhi, invoked Rosa Parks, and spoke about what if those people didn't, go forward with their social justice efforts, what would that have meant, and trying to compare it to this. I'm very frustrated with them that they continue to make those comparisons. None of those individuals had to go to a vote of their people to ask, it didn't require a vote. Martin Luther King and his movement, that was signed by LBJ, that the Civil Rights Act made it through Congress. It didn't require a national vote. Bus access didn't require a national vote. What Gandhi did in liberating India was a national movement of Indians for freedom from British oppression. It didn't require a vote for them to get that done. And comparing those issues to this civic issue, which would require a vote, it's very dishonest and very disingenuous, I feel. And I was really frustrated that that was not the first time that they have invoked those comparisons when they spoke on Monday. And I was really frustrated that they continued to do that at the dais like that. Tammy also mentioned that no one has ever explained to her what makes Lincoln and Omaha different, which is also a lie. Tammy knows that Omaha didn't have to vote on this. This is a city council action from Omaha, and Lincoln would have to vote on it. And, she also talked about how defeatism isn't a strategy, which is suggesting that those of us who are saying that we need to pause on this are being defeatist, and that's not what's going on. We have been clear that there is a path forward to victory. It's just that victory would be extremely expensive and time-consuming and labor-intensive for a campaign, right? And we were just trying to explain that doing this without those things was irresponsible. Nikki, I see if it gets voted down, could it be brought up again? The answer to that is pretty much no. The city does not have unlimited funds to just continue to raise money to go vote and vote and vote and vote and vote again. And also, it's really irresponsible if we lose this vote and, if we hold this vote, the negative messaging from the NFA will be relentless. It will be extremely vitriolic. It will be extremely mentally incapacitating for a lot of trans people. And we could face more suicides just by trying to hold the vote, to take away our options of winning, our chances of winning. Just by trying to hold the vote, we're putting trans people's lives at risk. And if we lose again, if we lose on this, and we say, well, why can't we just do it again? Well, because it's stressful for us. You're asking us to go through a loss and then go through the fight again. And fundraising for this, like we get to do it once, basically. We get to do it one time. And if we lose on this, that will be a mandate for the city. There won't be the political capital for a city council, any city council in several decades, to bring up this issue again, because we would have had a municipal mandate, right? And if we lose on this vote, the bigots in this city will get worse. They will be emboldened. They will have just won an election and they will have a mandate. And the status quo will not be maintained if we lose this vote. It will become worse. More LGBT people will lose their jobs. More LGBT people will be denied housing. More LGBT people will be turned away from public accommodations. It would be worse if we lost. And that is why myself and many, many, many others spent years trying to convince the city council, and not just from this city, by the way, from campaigns that have worked on this all across the country. We were explaining to them, you cannot hold this vote. You cannot introduce the issue unless you have the money and the campaign organization to go ahead and do it first, before introduction. Now, Nikki, you're right. Our opponents are never really going to release from this issue. The issue with this, when this comes up, the NFA is going to frame it as trans people using bathrooms. right? That is what they're going to blanket the city with.
Well,
That is going to be their
and it's all based on the predatory behavior. It's all based on the predatory lie.
yes. And Nikki, you're right that, you know, people who are adamantly opposed to us, we're not going to reach them. But there are a whole lot of people, enough to swing an election, that are ignorant of the issue. They don't really fall on either side. They don't understand trans people. They don't have LGBT people in their lives. And we can go get those votes. The problem is that the messaging that the right uses on this issue is extremely effective. When they start talking about public safety in restrooms for women and girls, when the conversation around the dinner table starts to become, well, I support LGBT people, but I don't want to put my grandma or my wife or my mom or my daughter into danger by pedophiles, you know, that I'm hearing all this information that says if we do this, we're just going to be allowing sexual predators into bathrooms. And of course I support trans people, but I don't want to allow predators into public spaces, you know, and that's how that messaging works for those people who are undecided, right? And that's where the election will be won or lost. And that is where we have to go focus our deep canvassing efforts on those people who are just ignorant. They don't really understand it, and they're super susceptible to the messaging that the right.
And again, being ignorant is not a slur. It's just a lack of knowledge. And that's the other piece where I think people get a little, you know, they're like, well, you know, are you calling me stupid? No, I'm actually just saying that you have a lack of knowledge around this topic, and I am willing to give you that education. I am willing to share with you what, you know, about those lies and tell you the truth.
Yeah. Eli. So back in 2012, when this issue came up, I was in a political class, government class. And we got assigned to different things, and that was assigned to us. But we had like different ways to express our like how we battle against it. Like we had assigned group that was for it and against it. And I remember I was like, well, how can, you know, there was like maybe 2 LGBTQ people, 3 in that classroom. And I was like, and rest were not. I was like, well, how do I educate people about this issue that have nothing to educate? So I made a script, like a play. And I showed it out, and I had my classmates play it out, and it really opened everybody's eyes about this situation. And I remember that, you know, those people were crying, and other people were like, well, I never really looked at it, understand this that way. So, you know, people have the right to remain ignorant, but we also have the right to educate them. Actually, more of a duty.
Yeah. Well, and again, that's why I do most of the stuff that I do as far as Speaking of Happy is concerned, and some of the training that I facilitate and some of the organizations that I work with, to talk about this topic in a way that it's like, look, I'm not a scary person. What you've been hearing is inaccurate, and let me help you understand why. You know, it's like Nikki's sharing here in the comments, you know, they're working on keeping Pride safe from the right wing here in Omaha. They're talking about us being groomers, you know, and there was there was a group that was arrested. I can't remember what city. I don't know if either of you are aware.
It was in Ohio. It was in Ohio.
Idaho.
Yes. So and here's the thing about that story. The interesting thing about that story is that these guys are from this Proud Boys thing or whatever. And they all went to the same hotel, I guess. They were getting into a van, and somebody at the hotel had enough wherewithal to look and go, that seems very odd. Got information, called the cops. The cops pulled this van over and got all these guys, or this truck over, got all these guys out, and, you know, and basically they were there to go and protest Pride. And they were going to go into Pride in Idaho, the parade, and just wreak some havoc. Now, they didn't find any guns. They did have some batons and some other things. but it's just really interesting to me that it's escalating to this point. And a lot of this has to do with right-wing media. So they're talking about doing the same thing here, and they're working with the FBI. I mean, the great thing about Omaha Pride, especially Youth Pride and the festival, is it's all taking place inside at the CHI Center, which to me is like what a relief, right? Now there could potentially be issues getting in the building, right? Now there could also potentially be issues with the parade itself. We hope that that's not the case. But these are like real things that we're having to face in the world today because of this right-wing rhetoric that is continuing to be pushed. And the most frustrating thing to me is that these folks have huge audiences of people, and they have people who will be advertisers and help promote these right-wing fundamentalist news talk radio jackasses, basically. And here we are. I have been doing this now for a few years, and I can tell you that I have never had more than 5 or 6 viewers at a time. And when I share about my Patreon page and ask people to go support it to help uplift my voice and our voices and the people that I have on the show, I'll tell you, I'll be honest with you, I make $150 a month from my Patreon page. And here's the thing, all of that money goes right back into the community, because when we do Frankly Speaking, we compensate the folks that come on that show and share about being transgender and non-binary, because I wouldn't feel right about them sharing their lives and who they are without giving them something. Now, it's not a huge amount of money, but it's something, right? I have supported nonprofits. I mean, we did a quick fundraiser for Winnebago Pride when they were on here a few weeks back, and we were able to earn we raised $175 in like 35 minutes so that they could get their website launched. And that's from 2 or 3 or 4 people who were watching the show. And then I went out and shared on my Facebook page because they also needed money for their pride. First ever. It's 2022, and it's the first ever pride that was happening at the Winnebago Reservation in Winnebago, Nebraska.
So let me comment on it.
And I'm just going to say, though, I shared out on social about that, and I brought in a $2,000 donation for them to have their pride.
Hey.
And so the Winnebago Two-Spirit organization now has a website. They got money to do their pride. Their event was beautiful. I was there. If you go out to my podcast on Anchor FM and search for Speaking of Happy, you can listen to the interviews that I did with just everyday Two-Spirit people.
Yeah.
So again, it's about like, how are we getting these messages out here? And then how do we get support back? Like, I'm doing this pride tour for 2022, and I was reaching out to folks to ask them to sponsor my trailer to help pay for expenses. But it was like, capitalist America. What do they say? Well, what's my ROI? What's my return on investment? Oh, I don't know. I mean, I get to continue to do this thing that actually might make a difference. I mean, do you ask the Midland Business Journal to give you all kinds of different ROI when you want to put an ad in their magazine? I'm asking you for advertising. I'm not asking you for a sponsorship. This is not a nonprofit, but I can tell you this much. Not only am I not a nonprofit, I'm not profiting. Even though I'm a business and it's a for-profit, because everything I make goes right back out into the community, and I'm doing things to uplift and elevate voices of the people in our community, and sharing about these things, and in hopes that people will understand where we're still at as a community, especially in Lincoln. I mean, we had a devastating loss of a trans man, Milo, after all of this stuff going on. And then there are people who actually want to say, oh, well, Milo struggled with this, that, and the other thing. It wasn't because of this. It's like, you know what? All of that had an impact, and it shouldn't matter. He still took his life and thought that that was the only solution. It's just, And I know Michelle, you said, can I comment on that? Go ahead. I hope you didn't lose your train of thought or what you wanted to say.
No, there's just two things. The key word is jackass, right? So, so this did made public aware to see how many jackasses are out there. Because my background is I have 5 brothers, and they're very heterosexual, straight men. But we grew up was born and raised in the city. So the whole, like, what we have issues with our tribe is that because of colonization, we lost that education and respect for Two-Spirit. And I'm glad this movement's coming back up, that Two-Spirits are getting, the rights and, because back then we used to honor them as very sacred people because of that. And we have 5 different gender identities that go with that, right?
Yeah.
So here I am, like all this activism work you see I do, I got the support from my brothers, right? And like I said, they're very straight heterosexual men. Actually, they're considered around the community as thugs, right? But even they, because we was born and raised in the city, we have a more open-minded. When I had my first son, Cyrus, they told me that masculinity was very toxic and hurtful when they were growing up.
Yeah.
A lot of things that was pushed on them. They said, we don't want to do that to our nephew. Whatever he expressed himself, however he wants to express himself, we're not saying. And one time, because my son liked stars and stuff like that, and he was an artist. He's an artist. So, as a child, he doesn't know what the rainbow means, right? He just knows it's a rainbow.
Yeah.
So my brother's like, oh my God, my grandma's losing it. Why? It's like she bought him these rainbow socks with stars on it. And he's like, but it was a girl's socks. And so it had a pink one, right? Matching set. And he's like, those are for girls, but these are my dancing socks. They got stars and he's dancing around. And it as much as frustrated my brothers, they're like, we're not going to say nothing. We're not going to say nothing. So it like filled my heart. Even with my son Moses, he seen a dollhouse at the dollar store one time. And I used to get him like action figure dollhouses,
Yeah.
That's what basically it is. And so I want that dollhouse. So I gave it to him. And my brother's like, well, we're not going to say nothing, So with my brothers, they back me up on a lot of activism I do. And one of the things is they take care of my sons. But like they said, they don't put that masculinity. So the jackasses, right, when I was telling my brother Evan about how I'm trying to get the Two-Spirit youth involved with the parade this Saturday, and I'm reaching out, trying to get that going, he said, oh my God, be careful and protect them. I'm like, what are you talking about? And he told me what happened with those people trying to army geared up. He's like, you didn't hear about that in the news? And he shared me an article. He's like, these people are crazy. They're trying to hurt the Two-Spirit. So you make sure you protect them when you're down there. So like he's seen that, right? And so, like I said, with our Native community, that was lost during colonization, because colonization was majority of the Catholic churches coming in saying that being gay is wrong.
Yeah.
And so that
forced colonization and assimilation stripped our culture and our traditions. And so, the tribes, there are, more than 150 indigenous nations or tribal nations, and they all have a different word and interpretation for what it is to be LGBTQIA2S plus, right? And, some of these nations honor all LGBTQ plus folks as Two-Spirit. Some honor those who are transgender or gender diverse or gender nonconforming as Two-Spirit. So there's a variety, but you are absolutely right. It was considered, your entire family was considered blessed if someone like myself or Natalie were born into your family.
Yes.
Your entire family would be considered blessed.
So I'm glad this move is happening. We're getting back a lot of our traditional ways and practices.
Yeah.
It's just, that's why I said I've always been very supportive of that. I've been an ally for many years, many, many years.
Yeah.
And, being a indigenous woman, I know what it feels like to be discriminated on and hated on. It's almost like a daily thing, but like I said, we have to keep pushing forward.
Yeah.
And so, like I said, like I was surprised my brother's, he's seen that and said that. He said, you got to protect the youth. Be careful.
Yeah. And I appreciate that. I love hearing that, that kind of support coming from, especially grown men, right?
Yep.
Because grown men, especially white grown men, aren't necessarily given permission to have all of their feelings. And so that can be can create a lot of divisiveness and frustration and harm. I mean, we see that toxicity playing out all over the place all the time. So, yeah. What else? I mean, I really appreciate the two of you joining me, especially Natalie last minute. Michelle, I know I told you 8:00 and then I asked you to move it up, and it actually worked out just fine this way. I appreciate you both sharing your insights about how we got to this point. Michelle, thank you for the work that you're doing with the Douglas County, the Democrats, not Douglas County, but the Democratic Party, and the work that you're doing. Natalie, you've done so many different things that have supported our community, and I don't know if enough people really understand just how much you have done.
That's
So
Thank you, Eli. Thank you
So I
for saying that.
appreciate, because you do a lot of this stuff without parades, right? Without accolades. You're just there doing it. You show up, you say what needs to be said. You're always knowledgeable about the issue. We happen to be part of an email chain and you took on some questions that were being asked by people because people were saying, no, this can't happen. And you were like, let me give you some context. And then you shared it, and you just did it in such a beautiful way. And I was just like, oh my God, thank goodness that you're a part of this group and that you took the time and the emotional labor to share that additional context, because
Oh,
that is how we learn. This is how we do get to the point that we can be successful in our efforts. So thank you, Natalie.
thank you, Eli. That was so sweet and very generous. And thank you for saying that. And thank you for talking with me today. And thanks everyone for watching and listening. Really appreciate all of you. So.
Yeah, right on. All right. Well, again, that's another episode of Speaking of Happy, a bonus episode. We went about an hour, almost 2 hours, about an hour and 45 minutes, because we still have that 15-minute intro, or it was 13 minutes, I think, today, because I started a little later than I wanted to. But I do enjoy these conversations. So if you ever need to come back, Michelle, if you have anything that you want to share about what's going on with the Democratic Party, happy to hear about any of the issues that you've got coming up that you want to be able to share with the community. And Natalie, you're always welcome here.
Sounds like a plan.
All right.
We'll
And
talk soon.
yeah, sounds awesome. And Nikki, thank you so much. Diana, thank you for your comments. The few of you that have been interacting with us this evening, we do really appreciate it. And take care and good night. I'm going to go ahead and end the broadcast.
Good night.